statewide opportunity held by the department to seek and gather stakeholder input in the drafting of South Carolina's Consolidated State Plan. As an education stakeholder, your input is very important. We want you to meaningfully engage in this process by asking questions and sharing your ideas. Again, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Morrison, Chief Strategy Officer for the South Carolina Department of Education. And before we begin today, I'm going to just give us a little bit of an overview and some technical information about how this meeting needs to run and how you all will be able to participate. We're excited to be here with you today, and we are going to try to end by 5 p.m. Sometimes we'll go a little bit over 5 or 10 minutes, but we're really going to try to stay on time, which means that a lot of information will be shared fairly quickly. But please know that you will always have the opportunity to ask questions, to participate in discussion, and those kinds of activities. So we don't want anyone to feel like they're being left out or that we're moving too fast. Our plan today is that you can see on the slide that we have 5 work groups. And for each of these work groups, there will be a brief presentation and then a discussion component where you'll be able to respond to critical questions about the content in that section. At any time, if you're experiencing any problems or you have any general questions whatsoever, we'd like you to put them in the chat boxes. So for example, on this slide, on this particular screen, you can see the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner. And we've already had Terry Martin and Leslie Schwartz ask some questions and look at sound and some issues like that. So if you are having any kind of issues, please make sure you put them in the chat boxes. Sometimes they'll be on the right, sometimes they'll be on the left. This meeting is being recorded, and that recording will be posted on the South Carolina Department of Education website under our ESSA page. At any point, if you have general questions, make sure you add them to the chat. We're planning to take our chat questions and build those out into some frequently asked questions and documents that we can make accessible to all. If you would, we're trying to make sure that we're not getting a lot of feedback on our mics and speakers. We're keeping mics and speakers fairly muted. And so really your main way of communicating with us will be through the chat boxes. At the end of the presentation, at the end of the whole meeting, there is an exit survey, which is an additional opportunity for you to respond about the effectiveness of this particular meeting, how you're feeling about ESSA and what your understanding about ESSA, and to provide any further general ideas. So there are going to be many, many opportunities for everyone to participate in today's meeting.
Well, thank you, Jen. My name is Scott Winburn. I am a lawyer with the South Carolina Department of Education. And I'm going to just give you a brief overview of ESSA to kind of get things started. So some of you may have heard this before, but it's worth repeating. The reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is known as ESSA, was signed into law in December 2015 as the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. But it's important to note that ESSA was first passed in 1965 as part of LBJ's War on Poverty. And I think it's important to view this legislation first and foremost as civil rights legislation. And through that prism, I think it informs kind of our discussion. The purpose of the law is to ensure that all students have a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education and to reach, at a minimum, a proficiency on challenging state academic achievement standards and assessments. There is special emphasis on subgroups of students who are at high risk of not meeting state standards. So that's, I think that's the framework that helps me anyway understand what ESSA is. South Carolina receives approximately $270 million each year in ESEA funds, the majority of which go to districts via formula. It's also important to note that this school year, 2016-17, will be a transition year for the major programs for ESSA, or ESSA, I should say. To implement ESSA, South Carolina will submit a consolidated state plan, which is most of you are familiar with that. We're going to submit the plan to the U.S. Department of Education to be reviewed and approved. And lastly, it's important that to know that the ESSA Consolidated State Plan will support the profile of the South Carolina graduate. And so that kind of overlays all of our discussions as well. And as you know, the profile of a South Carolina graduate is focused on world-class knowledge and world-class skills, life, and career characteristics. So at this point, I wanted to tell you also a little bit about the South Carolina's role under ESSA. I mentioned previously, mainly the South Carolina Department of Education manages federal funds and distributes those funds to districts. Our job is to ensure that federal requirements are met and federal reports are properly made. In terms of the role of stakeholders under ESSA, this is what we hear about today. We need stakeholders to submit feedback on the state plan so that we can all develop a consensus of what we believe education should look like in South Carolina. So that's the role of the stakeholders. As far as the process for being used to develop the South Carolina's ESSA state plan is, again, this is what we hear about today. We have, back last summer, began to solicit general feedback and input on the state plan, and we submitted an initial draft, and many of you may know we have posted a draft on our website, but we will continue in that process until we submit the plan by September 18th of this year. And lastly, where to get information about ESSA. Two websites. It's fairly straightforward. You can go to our website, which is www.ed.sc.gov, or review the United States Department of Education website. There, we are doing our best to constantly update the latest on ESSA, and we'll provide you the latest. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you can find our initial draft. Now I'm going to hand it over to Roy Saley to provide you a more detailed update regarding the template. Thank you.
Hello. This is Roy Staley, the Director of Federal and State Accountability with the South Carolina Department of Education. Just wanted to give you some updates. People have been asking questions in regard to the change of presidential administrations and what that may mean for the implementation of the law. Currently, the law is the law. It remains the same. It was passed by bipartisan support in Congress. And so we're still operating under ESSA as it was written. We're still under a timetable to submit our state plan in September. What has changed, of course, is the leadership in the administration, and because of that, there are some changes. The state plan template we received from the previous administration was organized by themes, and those themes are kind of the work group things that you'll see today as we talk. And so the South Carolina State Department of Education was to respond to those themes. The new state template is organized by programs, and those are the programs and titles, if you will, in ESSA. Title I, Part A and D, Title II, Title III, Title IV, Parts A and B, and then Title V, and the McKinney-Vento homeless. So while the templates for the state plan have changed and the format is different, the questions we ask and input and feedback we receive remain much the same. So whether it's the theme-based or by program, your input is extremely important to what we have. We have worked on several drafts under the previous template organization, and now we're in the process of moving that narrative to the new templates that we were given on March 13th. And then once we've done that, we'll see if there's anything else that needs to be addressed that was not covered in the previous templates. But the vision remains the same. And so your input to us is extremely important. All right. Turn to Scott.
Thank you, Roy. This is Scott Winburn again. Just to cover two more slides with you and to piggyback on what Roy mentioned. The next slide, or this slide, titled Communication and Consultation. I know it looks like a lot, but it is a quote from the ESSA law as passed. And the reason it's important is despite the fact that the regulations that passed are no longer in place, the law remains the same. And as Roy mentioned, our interest in seeking stakeholder input has not changed, and that will continue until we submit the plan and then beyond. So just to read, for everyone's benefit, I suppose, is again, this comes from ESSA, this is regarding state plans. Development by the state educational agency with timely and meaningful consultation with the governor and members of the state legislature. As you can see, it continues and lists a number of groups, including paraprofessionals, administrators, other staff, and parents. So our requirements to engage with stakeholders remains the same. And likewise, our discussion about coordinating programs authorized under ESSA, that remains the same. So it's worth including in this presentation to assure you all that that we will continue in stakeholder engagement. The next slide, in terms of our timeline, it just gives you a little bit of a brief of where we've been and where we're going. As I mentioned previously, we began, the law was signed into, or the legislation was signed into law December 2015, and about last summer was when stakeholder engagement began in earnest. And as you can see, from September to October of 2016, we had the initial drafting of the plan, and its long span of time, which covers the election, from November of last year until June, we anticipate continuing to seek stakeholder feedback on the plan. And then during the months of July and August, we anticipate finalizing the plan so that it will be submitted by the September 18th deadline. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Sheila Quinn regarding accountability.
Actually, I am going to jump in before Dr. Sheila Quinn. I want to do a brief introduction and talk a little bit about how we're going to make each of our sections work. Dr. Quinn, could you go ahead and just mute that mic up at the top for a moment? Okay.
See where S&D.
All right. Let me,
Okay, now
I'm gonna switch out.
She unmuted.
it was coming from her.
Yeah. So are we good? I'm gonna use this one.
No,
Okay.
I'll just use Sheila's
you
here.
have to use that. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're using a couple of different computers here. We wanted to make sure everything works. So this is Jennifer Morrison, and I am introducing Dr. Sheila Quinn. This will be the first of our 5 sections or 5 themes under ESSA that we're going to explore during this meeting. Accountability is probably the heftiest portion, and we wanted to make sure that we have this up front because this is one that has quite a few discussion questions and input that we need for how we're developing the plan. So please know that Dr. Sheila Quinn is going to talk for about 10 minutes. She's going to share a number of slides. There's going to be a lot of information. Please know that a lot of this information will be available on the Department of Education website. It depends. Some of it is actually in flux, but we wanted to share the most current information with you today. You will have time after she is done talking to answer some questions and send us some questions in a chat box and that kind of thing. But during the actual presentation, that opportunity won't necessarily be there. So Dr. Quinn, could you go ahead and get started?
Thank you, Jennifer Morrison. This is Sheila Quinn, and I am delighted to be with you today to talk a little bit about the accountability model. As Jennifer alluded to, this is a bit of a moving target. The General Assembly is beginning its meetings and discussions about the accountability model, and as you know, we have a state law that says we will have one accountability model that meets both state and federal guidelines. So it's important that the General Assembly have some time to do its work. The recommendations I'm going to discuss today are based on the work that the Education Oversight Committee did in several stakeholder meetings, and the State Department of Education also did in several stakeholder meetings. We met with we did over 40 presentations about the accountability model. We had over 25 meetings to seek input. So there have been a lot of educators' voices into some of these suggestions. And so without further ado, let's just take them one section at a time. The nice thing about ESSA that's a big change from the past is it's really geared around your state's ideas and what your state really thinks it needs to do to move itself forward. And so Superintendent Spearman has said, you know, we need more than just one day of testing or several days of testing, one state test that needs to measure how our students are doing. We need multiple metrics, and I think you're going to see that in these accountability model metrics. The first thing that we did is think about what our goals are for South Carolina, and you can see on this page the transformational goals that we will be tracking. And first one is that by 2035, 90% of students will graduate college and career ready. And that 2035 was strategic. It's because next year, in 2017-18, when this model begins, the students who are born in that year will be graduates in 2035. You can see in item number 2 that by 2020, the Education Oversight Committee would like us to start tracking our annual progress towards that 2035 target. So they will be looking for an increase of 5% per year in the percentage of students who graduate ready to enter post-secondary education to pursue a degree or to earn an industry credential without the need for remediation in English and math, and that is a key metric. It's also important to note here that we will have to track these goals not only by all students, but we'll have to look at it by all of our subgroups. So to really see how we're going to get to that 2035 target, there are several key benchmarks or growth measures that we're going to be looking at. And so I won't read these all to you, but you can see several things we've looked at before, but some of these are new. We're going to kind of set the marker with the percentage of kindergartners who enter ready to learn. You know that next year we'll be implementing for the first time a kindergarten readiness assessment that looks at 4 domains, and that will be what is tracked in this metric. And then we'll look at 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade as kind of mile marker points to see the percentage of students who are meeting expectations on our SC Ready and SC Pass assessments, and who are scoring meets expectations or higher. We'll also look at graduation rate, and in the 4th bullet, the percentage of students who are meeting the South Carolina profile, which in the short run will be our college and career ready metrics. You'll see those later. And then you see the last 3, which looks at those longitudinal elements. When they leave us in K-12, do they enter college without the need for remediation? Do they exit and earn a degree? And are they gainfully employed 5 years later? So we'll be tracking some metrics we've never tracked before. ESSA specifically requires us to track goals in 3 areas. So you, again, on this slide, see our macro goal. But below that, you also see goals in 3 specific areas that we need to pay attention to. ESSA says you have to have an achievement goal. And in the first goal, we have written that 90% of our students will score at level 2. As you probably know, a level 2 is approaches expectations on our SC Ready test. It is not met 2 on our SC Pass test, and it's a D on our end of course tests. So we're saying that we need 90% of our students to be above that level 1, because we know that if a student is at level 1, they're not on a trajectory for college or career readiness. We're going to be also tracking for ESSA the percentage of our students who are at level 3 or higher. That's a C or higher on our end of course tests, that meets expectations or higher on SC Ready, and that's a MET or higher on Pass, and we're looking at 65% of our students meeting that goal. Under graduation rate, we're looking at a 90% will graduate in 4 years. And then finally, ESSA pays special attention to our English language learners, and it requires us to set both a growth goal and a proficiency target that the state can determine. And our target is 70% of our English learners will achieve their expected growth yearly, and 70% will reach proficiency by the end of their 5th year in the English Learner Program. This slide is a reminder that all of the goals that you just saw, those 3 specifically, must be broken down by all of our identified subgroups. Those subgroups are listed for you on the right side of the page. We've got some new subgroups with ESSA: military connected, foster, homeless, and migrant are new subgroups. On the right side of the page is a reminder that we not only have to break our goals down by the percentage in our subgroups that are meeting those goals, but every single accountability metric that we're going to follow, achievement, growth, graduation rate, prepared for success, student engagement, and ELP, English language proficiency, all have to be broken down by our subgroup performance. And then finally, at the top, you can see that a subgroup is 20 students. So if your school has 20 students in any one of the subgroups, that subgroup will be reported on the report card. If you don't have 20 students, that subgroup will not be reported. Here is a big change with our new proposal in our ESSA accountability model that's very different from the past. You remember in No Child Left Behind, we all had the same targets. We all had to make the same level of improvement every year, no matter where you started. The concept that we're going to try in this accountability model is that in 2017, this report card coming up in November, we want you to consider that your baseline data. In all of the metrics, all of the goals that you just saw me talk about in prior slides, we want you to say, all right, this is our starting point. And then you can see we have 3-year targets. We have a 2018 to 2020, a 2020 to 23, and then in red, you see the midpoint. By 2026, we want you to be halfway to where we said you should be for those state long-term targets. So you can set for yourself, here's my beginning point, and here's where I need to be by the midpoint, the 2026. So if on the next slide, what you're going to see is an example of that to kind of make it easy to understand. Let's use graduation rate. So this particular school example in the second column, 2017, is at a 75% graduation rate. We know the 2035 goal for the state is for the school to be at a 90% graduation rate. The distance between 75 and 90 is 15 points. So by the 2026 target, we want your graduation rate to improve by 7.5 points. And so then you can do your math over there to the right, and you can figure out what your 3-year interim targets are. So your target will stay the same for 3 years, although you're trying to reach that target, and then it'll move up. One of the changes that we also were successful, at least thus far, and again, the General Assembly is working through some of these issues, is Superintendent Spearman has said we really would like to see some reduction in testing in South Carolina. This has been something she's heard from parents, from legislators, from teachers, from administrators, that we test and have tested much more than the feds have required of us. And so we were able to reach some compromise that we would do some reduction in testing. And that reduction is seen in our science and social studies. So we're still testing in ELA and math across all the same subjects we always have, 3 through 8 and in high school. But in science, we're going to alternate science, test science in grade 4, again in grade 6, and again in grade 8. In social studies, we're going to test social studies in grade 5 and grade 7. And of course, the high school tests for both of those 2 areas remain the same. This slide is a snapshot of how the point system is going to work for South Carolina. So if you look across our indicators in that first column and start with the one at the top, achievement. Achievement refers to the percentage of your students and how they're performing on the state summative assessments, SC Ready, SC Pass, end of course tests. Those are the tests that the feds consider our state tests. And in those particular areas, you can see that elementary and middle both count 45 points towards achievement and 30 points at high school. Growth, you can see that growth is counted 45 points for elementary and middle, but there's not a growth number of points for the high school, and that's because high schools use end of course assessments, and those are kind of one and done assessments. They're not repeated, so it's very hard to show growth. Specifically to the left, when you look at the details about growth, you can see that in the EOC's recommendations, all students are going to account for 50% of your growth, or 22.5 points. And your lowest quartile, or perhaps your lowest quintile, there's some discussion about moving that to quintile, will count for the other half of your points, the other 22.5. So when you're looking at your growth, you can see that the students in the lowest quintile or lowest quartile are going to count twice. They're going to count in your all students, and they're going to be specified and really focused on with the other half of your growth points. Graduation rate is not applicable to elementary and middle, so that's for high school, 30 points. ELP is 20 points for all three levels. And then finally, the one metric that's not test score based is your positive learning environment. That's your student engagement survey. It's going to count 10 points across all three areas. And then the last category, it's called prepared for success. And in this category, we're looking at students' performance along their SC Ready test. We're looking at their Lexile and their quantile performance. And are they on a trajectory to be reading and doing math where they need to be at 3rd through 8th grade to predict that they're going to be college and career ready? And in high school, we have 9 different ways a student is going to be able to demonstrate that they are college or career ready. So the total number of points as it exists today is 120 points. And so that is something that is being discussed in the General Assembly, if 120 is going to be the right number of points, or do we want to move that back to 100 points? Now let me take just a minute, and I'll do this very briefly. I won't spend nearly as much time as you probably would like me to talk about how you earn those points. And so the key thing that you need to see with this slide is every performance level on our state test, whether it's Pass, SC Ready, or end of course, has some corresponding points that you can earn. So if you're down at not met 1 on Pass, or it does not meet expectations on Ready, or on an F on your end of course test, you're going to earn 0 points. So students will get 0 points if they score in those ranges. They'll get 1 point if they score at that next level, which we call level 2. They'll get 2 points if they're at level 3, which is meets expectations in the C. They'll get 3 points if they're at exemplary 4, exceeds expectations, or B. And then they'll get 4 points on the 2 tests that have that 5th level of category. So the reason why we did a point system like this is we wanted to incentivize movement at all levels. We wanted there to be incentive for our top performing students who are already at meets expectations to push to get to exceeds expectations because they get more points. So just to give you a brief example of how the points work, and I won't do this for all the slides, but if I do it one time, you'll see how the pattern works. In Quinn Elementary School, that has 100 students who are tested, the greatest number of points at Quinn Elementary School that you can earn for SC Ready ELA is 300 points, because 3 is the highest number of points if you hit exceeds expectations for all students. So 300 points. The same thing is true for SC Ready Math. The highest number of points, if everybody scores exceeds expectation, would be 300 points. On SC Pass, for Science and Social Studies, there's a 5th level there, so the possible number of points is a 4 on every test. So for the 100 students, that's a 400 for Science and a 400 for Social Studies. So when you add all of those up, the total number of points you can earn is 1,400 possible points. But Quinn Elementary School didn't get a 4 or a 3 on all of those tests. We earned 800 points out of all the possible points. That represents 57% of the possible points. 57 times the weight of that category, which remember, achievement counted 45 points, means that Quinn Elementary School got 25.7 out of the possible 45 points. That's how, right now, as we have written the model, the metrics will work for achievement. Growth. Growth also counts 45 points, and what I really want you to understand here is achievement and growth now count equal weight in the model. They're equally important. So with growth, again, half of your points are coming from all students meeting their growth, and the other half is the bottom quintile students meeting their growth. In the EOC's recommendation, the growth model that we will be using for the first time in accountability is a value-added growth model. If you are familiar with your value-added results in our EVOS data system that we've been using for the past several years in our teacher evaluation system, that's where you can begin to look to see how your school is performing with value-added. EVOS pulls all prior test scores for each child in ELA, math, science, and social studies to make a prediction of a child's expected growth. So even though in our model here, we're talking about a growth metric predictions for ELA and math, you have to remember that in an EVOS model, all of the child's prior tests figure into what they believe is a child's expected performance on their test for the next year. Also remember that value added is predicting where it thinks a child will land in the rank order. I like to think about it this way. It's using all of my past history of testing and where I landed, my place in line, to predict my future place in line based on all the students in the state who are taking the test at my same level. If I finish in the exact same place in line from one year to the next, I have held or I've met my expected growth. If I move ahead of my place in line than I was the year before, then there's evidence that I exceeded my growth. And if I go backwards in my place of line, then I have lost my place or moved back in my place and I have not made my expected growth. So here's how it could potentially work. In Quinn Elementary School that has 100 students, if my group of students was at the 50th percentile in third grade, in 2016, in 27, if they're in the 54th percentile, they've moved up. They've shown that they've moved up in their place in line, and so there's been some growth there. And we haven't yet determined how many points you get for movement. That hasn't been determined yet in our methodology, but I just wanted to give you some idea. They're looking at the students as a whole, looking at each individual student, but also the performance of the students as a whole. On the other side of the table, you can see, we'll look at Quinn Elementary School had 22 students in the bottom quintile in third grade. If in 2016, those 22 students were in the 25th percentile, they move up in 2017 to the 26th percentile. Once again, there's some growth. And so some manner of points will be awarded for that growth. The next slide has a slight error, and I'm going to explain that as I go along, and I apologize I didn't catch that before. It's been a change as this metric has changed over time. But ELP is the next category. It's worth 20 points, and it is worth 20 points for both elementary and middle as well as high school, and that's the source of the error. You can see it used to be worth 10 points for high school, but that is different now. It's worth 20 points for both. So if you'll just pay attention to what I say about elementary and middle and also apply that to high school, you'll be just fine here. So half of your points in ELP are going to be from growth, and the other half of your points are going to come from proficiency. So the question is, how do I determine growth? So let's look at that first column and look at that very bottom box. When an EL student takes the access test, it takes into account the age of that student and that student's initial performance level. In other words, what level are they on? Are they a 1? Are they a 4? Are they a 5? What level are they on? And it factors that into how the student performs. And a student has been deemed to have met a year's growth if that student scores in the 40th percentile or higher on their access test. So that's what you're going to be looking at annually for all students, all EL students who are taking their access test. Did they meet the 40th percentile or higher? Therefore, did they meet that year's growth? On the proficiency side, ESSA says that the state can determine a length of time or a period of time that the student has been taught in the English Language Learner Program, and at which point in time the student should reach proficiency. So if you look at that very bottom box for ELP, the percentage of students who reach a 5.0 composite score on the access test, which is the proficient score, by the end of their 5th year of service in the EL program will be given credit or the point for meeting the proficiency standard. So a couple of things for me to say there to be sure you understand. The first thing is the Title III office is looking at that 5.0 composite score, and they have been seeking stakeholder feedback over the course of several months to determine what should go into that composite score to make it a 5.0. In the past, you had to have a 5 on all domains. And that has been really impeding our performance, our proficiency performance in South Carolina. That's a pretty rigorous cut. So they're looking at a different definition for that 5.0, and the Title III office will be explaining that as we move along. But right now, for the purposes of accountability, however that 5.0 is defined, what accountability is looking at is, does the student meet that 5.0 by the end of their 5th year in the program? So that is how you'll get your proficiency 10 points. The next category that's in the accountability model for high school is the Prepared for Success category. It has 2 areas that we're focusing on. It's looking at the percentage of students who are either college ready or career ready by the time they exit grade 12. So how can a student be college ready? Well, there are 5 ways. A student can be college ready if they score a composite score of a 20 on the ACT. A student could be college ready if they have a 3 or higher on AP exams in English, Math, Science, Social Studies, or AP Capstone. A student can be college ready if they score a 4 or higher on IB exams. A student could be college ready if they meet the SAT benchmarks as determined by the Commission on Higher Education and the South Carolina Technical College System, and those have not been released yet, so we're waiting to see what those SAT benchmarks are. Or the student can be college ready if they complete at least 6 hours of dual credit or dual enrollment, either one of those, in English or Math or STEM, and they score a C or higher in those 6 hours of credit. The student can also meet the college and career ready metrics. If you'll back up 1 slide, please. Thank you. No, 1 more forward. There you are. The student can also meet the college and career ready metrics if they do one of these 4 items for career readiness. And the first way is a student could be a CATE completer and have completed an industry credential that's aligned to their CATE program where that's applicable. If the student earns a silver, gold, or platinum on the WorkKeys exam, the student could earn a 31 or higher on the ASVAB military test, or the student could complete an approved registered youth apprenticeship through Apprenticeship South Carolina. So those metrics are going to be interesting to collect because there are 9 different ways a student can meet those. We'll be working with your testing and accountability roundtable on the best way to collect all of those data points. The last metric that's proposed in the accountability model, again, is the non-academic or non-test-based metric. And we're really excited about including this for the first time in the accountability model. We're calling it the Positive and Effective Learning Environment metric. And what it really is it's a student engagement survey. And it's looking at the extent to which students report that they're highly engaged, strategically engaged, passively compliant, or disengaged in schools. And those are just sample words. And the reason we put them in there that way is because we are We are currently under an RFP to procure a student engagement survey. So those terms, highly engaged down to disengaged, could change based on whatever instrument that we procure. But for the purposes of today, we wanted you to see that we're looking for at least 4 levels. And the highest level, we were talking about a possibility of awarding 4 points for the highest level, 3 for the next highest, 2, and then 1. So currently in our plan, we are going to have performance ratings on each of the 5 indicators that you saw in the previous slide. So there will be a performance rating for achievement. There will be a performance rating for growth, graduation rate, English language proficiency, prepared for success, and that student engagement survey. Each of them will have a separate performance level rating. And to the right, at least today, these are the names of those performance levels: excellent, good, average, below average, and at risk. There is some discussion in the General Assembly this week, next week, and possibly beyond at changing those titles, those performance levels. And one of the suggestions is moving from these words to an A to an F. So in terms of, in the spirit of stakeholder feedback, this might be some good time for you to talk with General Assembly members, talk with your administrators about the use of the terms excellent, good, average, below average, at risk, or if you prefer other terms such as A, B, C, D, F. And then finally, you can see here 2 things. First, you can see a sample of what a landing page report card could look like. And what I want you to see on this is there will be categories across the top that allow you to drill down to specific information. One of those categories that's missing in this prototype will be those goals that we're tracking, those ESSA goals. And then you can see each of the performance categories: achievement, growth, English language proficiency, school environment. You can see that there will be a rating title for each of those areas and a place for you to click down and see the actual details, the subgroup performance, how the points were calculated. Over to the left, you will also see that there will be a final summative rating, which is the aggregate of all of the different levels that you have working at your particular school level. This is an elementary card, so there are 4, pulled together into one overall summative rating, and that's the excellent that you see to the left. So those are the key parts of the accountability model. I know that's a lot to take in a very short amount of time, and we do have some questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer Morrison as she talks through this next section.
Hi, everyone. I do want to say thank you to everyone who's putting questions into the chat box. I think that, in any format, there are always pros and cons. And because we're trying to keep this online meeting to an hour and a half, there's not going to be an opportunity here necessarily for you to get a lot of answers, because your questions are very specific, as they should be. But what we'll be doing is putting together a frequently asked questions document and then sharing that back out with everyone. Please also keep in mind that, as Sheila shared, a lot of this is in flux, especially with accountability. It sort of depends on what's happening with the General Assembly as well. So what you can see on this screen, here's the format for making sure that you're hearing what you're saying. So what you see are 6 critical questions that we have related to accountability as we're moving toward the ESSA Consolidated State Plan. And I'm not going to read them to you, because I think you can see them. You have accountability 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you do not have to answer all of these questions. And I'm about to give you some time to actually do that. But take a look at the questions. And some of them you may be more interested in, and others there might be questions there that are really not in your wheelhouse and that you don't necessarily have an answer for. But take a look and see if you have a response to one or more of these questions. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that the way that the question pods work on this page, you will be able to provide one answer when to a question. So you won't be able to provide multiple answers to a single question. So just keep that in mind. But note that there is a chat box there to the left, If you have additional information or you have, actually Terry, yeah, thank you for that. I hope you can hear me better now with the mic closer to my face. So if you have additional questions or things that, other questions that you want us to address, then make sure you put that in the chat box. So I see that we already have an answer going in for accountability question number 4. I'm going to be quiet for 2 or 3 minutes, have the teacher wait time. I was a middle school teacher for 15 years, so give you some good wait time so that you can look at the questions and provide some answers. All right, so I don't want to be one of those folks who's constantly talking while you're trying to think, but just keep in mind, let's see, answers to all of the questions except nobody is 11 on question number 5. Oh, yep, now we have an answer there too. That's good. Please know that Sheila and our staff are not necessarily going to try to answer questions right now, but we will be producing that frequently asked questions document in response to your questions. Because things are very in flux with accountability right now, I'm not positive that we're going to be able to post our slides with it, but we'll if we can, we certainly will. We want to make sure you all have the most information that you possibly can. Keep answering. I'm going to say one more thing. Please also know that this is not going to be the last stakeholder input opportunity. I mean, I think every format has its strengths, and a good strength of this particular format is us really hearing your questions and being able to consider them carefully, and we can get much more technical in there. And but sometimes the face-to-face meetings are handy for the back and forth and the actual discussion. So this is not the last opportunity. So I'm going to give 2 more minutes. Nope, okay, we're gonna wrap it up in about 30 seconds. So if there's something else that you would like to add, please add it right now. Okay, got about 20 more seconds. Okay, another opportunity that you have for providing input and feedback to the Department of Education about ESSA is Scott shared earlier in our presentation that we have one of the earlier drafts posted, and you can email us at, is it essa@ed.sc.gov?
Is or my email address.
Yeah, so you can email Scott Winburn, or you can email essa@ed.sc.gov with further questions and comments and that sort of thing. We want to make sure that everyone has plenty of opportunity to do this, because it is stakeholder input is very, very important in the work that we do here at the Department of Education. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap us on this discussion around accountability. So Lydia, if you would go ahead and take us back. Okay. All right, so accountability was probably our heftiest section of the presentation today. We're going to run through a couple of other sections. Again, same format, a little bit of a presentation, then some questions. There won't be quite as many questions necessarily with our other sections, but let's get into school interventions and support under ESSA. And you'll be hearing from Dr. Latoya Dixon, one of my favorite people, who is the director of the Office of School Transformation. And she's going to be sharing what targeted and, well, actually a variety of supports and interventions that are required under ESSA. There you go.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this lovely Friday afternoon and providing your input about what we're going to do in South Carolina to make education the best it can be for our students. As many of you may know, we support both focus and priority schools in the Office of School Transformation. You may be familiar with the fact that focus schools apply to Title I schools. In ESSA language, we now call focus schools schools in need of targeted support and intervention. And there are now two ways that a school can become a focus school. So let's talk a little bit about those two ways. You may remember from Dr. Quinn's earlier slides that some of the performance indicators that she discussed were those that you see listed there on the screen. So a school, a Title I school, may become a focus school if it has low-performing subgroups whose performance falls at or below the performance of all students in one of those three performance indicators: achievement, English language learners, and graduation rate. The second way that a school can become a focus school is by having consistently underperforming subgroups. You may be wondering, how do we define significantly below the average? So what we're going to do is look at those historical underperforming subgroups and take a look at whether or not they are performing significantly below the average state performance for the same subgroup for 3 consecutive years in those same 3 leading performance indicators: achievement, English language proficiency, and graduation rate. We're going to define significantly below as more than 2 standard deviations below the state average. Those historically underperforming subgroups are those we're already familiar with. They are our disabled students, our students of poverty, English language learners, Hispanic students, Native American students, as well as African American students. The second types of schools that will provide type of school that will provide support and intervention for are priority schools. As noted in the earlier slides, focus schools are now called schools in need of targeted support and intervention. Priority schools will be known as schools that need comprehensive support and intervention. Priority schools or schools in need of comprehensive support and intervention will meet one or more of those following categories you see there on the screen. They may be Title I schools in the bottom 5% using the weighted point index we discussed earlier. Non-Title I schools, they'll be differentiated by elementary, middle, and high. And again, we'll be looking at those schools in the bottom 5%. High schools that have a graduation rate of less than 70%, or Title I schools that have what we will now call chronically low-performing subgroups. And we're going to talk in the next couple of slides about how we define chronically low-performing subgroups. Chronically low-performing subgroups will be considered chronically low-performing if a focus school does not improve their performance after 2 cycles. So focus schools, or schools in need of targeted support and intervention, will be identified annually. You may remember Dr. Quinn talking about those 3-year interim targets. So if after 2 cycles of those interim targets we don't see improvement, that particular focus school could become a comprehensive support and intervention school. One thing that's going to be slightly different is that comprehensive support and intervention schools or priority schools will be identified every 3 years. That means we're going to give schools 3 years to work toward improvement and intervention to improve the performance of their students. And that ends our section on school interventions and support, and I will turn it back over to Jennifer Morrison.
Okay, so with this particular section of our presentation, we really only have one question. We really want to get some general thoughts and questions related to school interventions and support as Dr. Dixon has just described. You know, there is still a chat to the left, but I want to give you a couple of minutes to share any thoughts or questions that you have related to school interventions and support under ESSA. All right, thank you for that, Lori. You can actually put your questions or thoughts in either one of the boxes. Also a good question, Betsy. We will make sure we include answers as we can provide in our frequently asked questions document. These are good. Okay, all right, so I think what I'll do, let's give it about 30 more seconds. In seconds. All right, let's go ahead and close this particular discussion and move to our next section. Couple more slides. Okay, so in under ESSA, sort of a third theme area in the plan has to do with challenging academic standards. This crosses in multiple offices and has quite a bit to do with how we do our state level assessments. In South Carolina, Liz Jones, who is our director of the Office of Assessment, is here to share some thoughts related to a mathematics exception.
Thank you. ESSA and state law, the Education Accountability Act, mandate that students in grades 3 through 8 take a mathematics test each year. Students must also take a test once during high school. Currently, the SC Ready mathematics test is administered to students in grades 3 through 8. Students take the Algebra 1 end of course test when they take Algebra 1 for high school credit. Some students take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Those students currently must take the 8th grade math test and they must take the Algebra 1 end of course test in the same year. The 8th grade scores are used for middle school accountability and the Algebra 1 test scores are used for high school accountability. ESSA now allows a new exception. If a student takes the Algebra 1 test in 8th grade, the student doesn't have to take the 8th grade general mathematics test, as long as that student takes a more advanced mathematics test during high school. for example, Algebra 2 end of course test. The Algebra 1 score would be used for middle school accountability, and the Algebra 2 score would be used for high school accountability. The state has the option to choose that exemption, that exception. If we do choose that exception, then state law, the Education Accountability Act, would need to be amended to allow for this, and an Algebra 2 test would be developed or adopted for that purpose.
All right, so what we're looking for here are any thoughts or questions you have about the Department of Education exercising this mathematics assessment option for accountability. So the algebra exception that Liz just described, do we have any questions or thoughts about that? So I'm going to get silent so you can give your responses. Remember, you don't have to respond to everything. All right, thank you for that. Liz is watching your responses very, very carefully, just so you know. Okay, going to give it about 30 more seconds. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to move to the next theme or section. So again, I just want to express our deep thanks for you spending your time with us this afternoon. We are watching your questions and responses very intently, and we're actually looking forward to digging into some of these and providing that frequently asked questions document. Next, we have Carla Hawkins, who is our Deputy Superintendent over the Division of State, Federal, and Community Resources. Carla has been working very hard with a committee on the Supporting Excellent Educators portion of the ESSA. And so I'm going to turn it over to Carla Hawkins.
Thank you, Jen. The Supporting Excellent Educators Work Group is responsible for working with 7 areas of the Consolidated State Plan. I will speak to each of these areas in the order listed. One focus of the work group is to determine how to eliminate disproportionate rates of access to educators. ESSA requires the State Educational Agency, or SEA, to describe how low-income and minority children enrolled in Title I Part A schools are not served at a disproportionate rate by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers. The SEA must also describe the measures it will use to evaluate and publicly report the process implemented with respect to each description. Improvement of student achievement is a major focus under ESSA. The SEA must describe how it will use Title II Part A funds for state-level activities, including how activities are expected to improve student achievement. If the SEA plans to use Title II Part A funds to improve equitable access to effective educators, it must describe how such funds will be used. A description of the state system of certification and licensing of teachers, principals, or other school leaders is required in the Consolidated State Plan. In order to improve the skills of students, it is imperative that there is also improvement with regard to the skills of educators. To achieve this, the SEA must describe how we improve the skills of teachers, principals, or other school leaders to enable them to identify students with specific learning needs, particularly students with disabilities, English learners, students who are gifted and talented, and students with low literacy levels. The SEA must also describe how instruction will be provided based on the needs of such students. Data and consultation are two very important measures of success. As a result, in the Consolidated State Plan, an SEA is required to describe how the state will use data and ongoing consultation to continuously update and improve the activities supported under Title II, Part A. Successful teacher preparation programs and the strong support of educators play a major role in the success of students. The SEA must, in the state plan, describe the actions the state may take to improve the preparation programs and strengthen support of teachers, principals, or other school leaders based on the needs identified by the SEA.
Thank you, Carla. All right, so this has been a significant section in ESSA, and Carla gave a good overview. Some of this has changed under the template, but some of our questions still remain about the important things to include in terms of how we identify and support successful educators. So the questions are dealing with that. We have 5 up here. So what I'd like to do is give you a few minutes to look at the questions and share any responses or additional questions that you have. Remember, 1 response per question. And then you also have the option of the chat box for providing input. So I'm going to quiet for a couple of minutes so you can take a look and jump in there. We already have a response to question number 3. It will be very interesting to look at your answers in comparison to some of the stakeholder information that we gathered in regional meetings across the state while we were developing the state equity plan. The equity plan and ESSA have been very strongly connected, and it's interesting to see how things move. There's a lot of work that's happened under the equity plan that we're moving into ESSA under. Alternative certification is definitely something that has come up quite a bit. Okay, let's give another minute on this screen. right, let's give it another 30 seconds. I will say it's been really great to get a lot of good suggestions. I think Lexington 1 on the last screen, you guys provided some suggestions about what was being shared, and I think Bessie, you actually gave Bernadette props for one of her questions, so thanks for that. Yes, Ms. James, I hear that. We're definitely wanting to give you more time, but we're trying to stay within our time as well. Please know that you can respond at any time using essa@ed.sc.gov. So Sharon, I think one thing that you might need to do is, why don't you email us at essa@ed.sc.gov. I think Scott's putting it in the chat box right now. If you email us, we'll make sure that we hear it and report back to how all the stakeholder input is actually being used. Or you can use Scott's email address too. So, and also remember that the pro of this format is that we have some good transcripts and we can do something statewide, and you guys don't have to travel here, but there will be other stakeholder meetings as well. So I'm going to give it 30 seconds. Okay, we're getting pretty close to time. We've got about 15 minutes. You'll have an opportunity also at the end with an online survey. There are just 2 open-ended questions on that. For anything that we forgot to, anything that you forgot to say or add in for questions, you can add that to the survey. At the end, the survey will only take really about 5 minutes or so. And but let's do our last theme around ESSA. Our last section, and that has to do with supporting all students. And Roy Staley is back to share some information about this portion of ESSA with us. And as you know, Roy is our Director of the Office of State and Federal Accountability.
Thank you, Jen. Supporting all students was one of our work groups, and it was a theme that was in the original template. It's not necessarily in the new template in the theme, but is identified by program. And ESSA does include programs for migrant children, children neglected and delinquent, English learners, and homeless children. Foster children are also mentioned in it. And then in reality, all children, because Title I Part A is the basic program that districts have and schools have. And if you have funding in a Title I school-wide school, you serve all children. The law does emphasize, however, serving children and identifying ways to help children who are at risk from not graduating from high school. And each of these groups have some unique characteristics that the law asks us to look at and work on. I would tell you that under No Child Left Behind, with its emphasis on accountability and adequate yearly progress, many schools spent their Title I funds on reading and math programs. And they did not branch out into other areas, social studies, science, the arts, behavioral programs. The new law allows more flexibility for those than in the past. So when we talk about supporting all students, particularly in a Title I school-wide project school, all students in that school are Title I eligible, and all the programs technically in that school could be supported by Title I funds. But the school looks at its needs assessment and submit the priorities. And so I think we do have some questions that Jen's going to pose, and we'll move on there.
All right, thank you, Roy. All right, so we actually have 5 questions with supporting all students here. I actually, in the first question, we've listed, the different groups that are served under this area. So if you would, take a look at these 5 questions that deal with supporting all students and share any thoughts or additional questions that you have similar to our other sections. I will point out that question number 5, it says 21st century. What does CCLC stand for again?
Community Learning Center.
Oh, okay, so 21st century community learning centers, after school programs. So that's what that one refers to. Well, that's not a question that we've asked before in any of our stakeholder meetings, but Sabrina Moore, our director, wanted to make sure she was hearing what people's thoughts were. I think it's a really interesting idea. In question number 3, town hall meetings. Unfortunately, the questions are so long on these screens that it's really hard to see. Lydia's going to move it down a little bit. We still have everybody in the room here. I'm recording. Thank you for that 21st century response down on the right. Very good. So does anyone have any thoughts about non-academic support? That's question number 4. Good, thank you. Good. I'm glad this is a lively discussion. This is a very important aspect of what can happen under ESSA, even though it's been restructured a little bit. So it is really important to hear from everyone here. Okay. I'm going to wrap it in about 30 seconds. We don't want to give Roy tons more time than everybody else because then other presenters here will be very jealous. So we're going to wrap it in about 30 seconds. Remember, you can add anything you want to in the chat box. And Scott is doing a good job of reiterating his email address. Remember, you can get in touch with us anytime. There's also essa@ed.sc.gov. And this will absolutely not be the last stakeholder meeting. We're trying various formats to be able to reach as many stakeholders as possible. And, our administration here at the Department of Education is very, very committed to listening and making sure that we are moving together with our partners and stakeholders in the state. With that, got about 10 seconds. Timer. All right, with that, I'm going to, let's close this discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. And we're going to turn it over to Scott to wrap up today's meeting.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody, for attending, participating in this meeting on this wonderful Friday afternoon. So thank you for your dedication. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate Jen Morrison and Lydia Hutto giving us this format through Adobe Connect to have this forum, and really do appreciate your responses. So the next steps are these. We will have another stakeholder meeting, and in all likelihood, the Department of Education will host another face-to-face meeting in the next month or two. We don't have a date for that yet, but please stay tuned for that. And of course, once we have the new template or the new draft in the new template, we will post that. So please keep an eye out for that as well. And we welcome your input on the new draft of the Consolidated State Plan. You have my email, and that's my direct line, 734-0070. So please do not hesitate to call us. And then lastly, we're asking you to complete this survey. As we mentioned, it does contain sort of an open-ended question or two for anything that we didn't cover. But please take time to do that. You can have the link. You can do it later, but dig deep. If you want to do it right now, please do. And again, really appreciate your participation, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Are we off mic?
Good.